have to really start with how fundamentally powerful culture is, all forms of culture, including visual art, music, language.
We can rebuild buildings, we can rebuild bridges, we can rebuild schools, but if we do not incorporate our story, our art, and our culture, and our history.
A cultural framework. The theme for our community is community, culture, and commerce. And that's not just what Ashe says, that's what everybody says.
Part of the creative placemaking work is not about arts and culture on its own, but arts and culture as it is integrated in how we think of healthy communities.
What's important to you? What's important to me? How might we use arts and culture to advance our joint missions?
I know many of you are in the room, which is a blessing in itself because it means that I work closely with a lot of you in terms of trying to advance some of these, I'm going to call them ideas, that has been embraced in my community. So I'm very grateful to Iberia Parish and my friends and colleagues here who have helped us to advance these community building initiatives, as one of my friends called it. My name is Phebe Hayes, Phebe Farshawn Hayes. For those who remember me from back in the days when I started in the school system as a speech pathologist. And I have a great love for Iberia Parish. I am a descendant of West African former slaves, and I know who they are. I know what plantations they served on. I know who the slaveholding families were, and I honor my people. At one point as a child, that was very embarrassing to me, slavery up. But I have come to understand the transition, the journey that people go through in accepting their identity. And I think about these children. Someone asked me to do a presentation on genealogy or family history with the children in their church community. And I went, do you understand? A lot of the kids don't want to hear this. And he said, well, just go in and do it, and et cetera, et cetera. And I began to think, it's about planting seeds. It's about helping children to understand the people they come from, and presenting those people, those ancestors, in a light or in a way that is that's respectful and that, to me, is worthy of celebrating their history. And maybe one day they'll catch up with the rest of us like I had to, because I grew up with my grandparents, the elders in my family, talking about their childhood, their ancestors. And I didn't really want to hear a whole lot of that either, but I logged it. I registered it, I remembered it, so that as I got older and more matured, I came to truly honor my history. And I think it's true for any child to get them interested in family history it's a job. They don't really want to hear about the past. But in a community like Iberia Parish, it's critical to me that children understand who they come from, especially the children who are descendants of those people who have been enslaved on the plantations here in this parish. Because for you to understand that, then you can understand why there are so many social situations, problems that go on even today. Because some of those social problems are residual effects of slavery, of Reconstruction, of Jim Crow segregation, and exploitation. So anyway, as I told you, I was a speech pathologist in the school system. About 1976 is when I started working here for 10 years. So that's how Melvin and I knew each other on my special ed days. But then I went to the University of Louisiana at Lafayette in 1986, and I joined the faculty there. And one of the best decisions I ever could have made. I loved UL. University of Louisiana, Lafayette. And then my last 13 years at the university, I was the Dean of the College of General Studies, which I honor that experience and my colleagues and just the development that I was able to go through as Dean of that wonderful college. But my experience has opened up my mind to multidisciplinary kinds of learning and understandings, where different professionals, different individuals who come from different perspectives come together to look at problems in society with their various lenses as a way of helping to solve some of those problems. So I'm not a historian, but I love history. I absolutely love history, but not for the sake of studying the Civil War, or even just studying slavery, or studying the Great Migration of blacks from the Deep South. I'm interested in it because I understand its value in helping people to come together around our shared history. So I'm here today because I founded the Iberia African American Historical Society. And that started with my big interest in genealogy, my family's genealogy, that I was able to delve into after I retired in 2013. And I also did some volunteer work at the library, the genealogy room in Parkview. And you know, I wanted to do I didn't want to just stay home and not contribute. But as part of that experience, I remember one day I was looking at some books on the shelves, and I came across one book, and it was entitled The Great Physicians of Iberia Parish, and some of you have heard me talk about this. And that book, I read through it, and I knew it was a relic of Jim Crow, so I kind of knew what I was going to find. And all the physicians' pictures, I knew a lot of these physicians growing up as a child in this community. Some of those doctors had been my doctors, but they were all white and they were all male. But it was offensive to me in some ways because I grew up hearing my grandmothers and grandfathers talk about Drs. Dorsey, Dr. Scoggins, Dr. Pearson, Dr. Williams. And I knew about Dr. Diggs because I grew up downtown in New Iberia. And Dr. Diggs, these are all black doctors, Dr. Diggs had his practice at the corner of Park Street and Ann Street in New Iberia. And he basically practiced there. He practiced in New Iberia for 50 years in this particular community. But so I found it troubling that this book that honored these great physicians from 1859 to 1959 did not include any women and did not include any physicians of color. And again, I understood that this book was, again, as I call it, a relic of Jim Crow segregation. And everybody in this room I know what Jim Crow was about. It was about everybody understanding what their place was. Blacks had their place in society, whites had their place in society. And God help you if you violated those rules, right? And there were legal consequences in case you did violate those rules back in the day. But it's interesting because I finished from high school in 1972. My class was the first class to desegregate New Iberia Senior High, the class of 1970, the sophomore class. So if you remember, New Iberia, for those of you from here, New Iberia Senior High, back in 1970, when the school was desegregated, began with the 10th grade. So my class was the first class, 10th grade class to desegregate that school. And my class was also the last freshman class at Jonas Henderson Senior High School, which was our historically black high school in Iberia, which no longer exists. And I think this is the story of the Deep South back in that period. So I grew up in this community. I grew up experiencing Jim Crow segregation. But I want my community to be better than what we left. And I want us to start looking at our history. So I started looking at, okay, what's the history? What's the narrative that's being told about Iberia Parish? Well, the history of Iberia Parish, what do you read? And this is not rhetorical. What are you reading when you read the history of Iberia?
The Spanish founded New Iberia in 1779.
No.
Acadians came. Acadians
Acadians
arrived.
came. The French were here before.
Right. Native Americans.
Then the English came,
Right.
that's how the Weeks family got here. They were British.
And the, what about the Native Americans?
Native
Because
American.
every now and then you will
the
see.
Chittimacha,
Right. Now, what about the Africans?
well, they won the plantations.
Well, here's the thing, but that's what, the Africans were here before the Acadians.
Right.
So why are we not part of that history? And that was troubling to me. So, okay, so I have a book, or I have actually books that I found in the library that excluded the history of my people. Because even when you look at the veterans of Iberia Parish, World War I, World War II, they were all white soldiers. My people were veterans of those wars, all the way to the Civil War. My dad died recently. He was a Korean War veteran, and I'm so proud of my father. But his service has been wiped out. And that's another story I want to tell you about. I'll get back to the veterans. So we can't have a community whose history is so, it ignores the history of all of its people. As a friend of mine said, 40% of our community is black, but we're left out. We're left out of the story, out of the history of Iberia Parish. And there's something wrong with that, especially if all of us with our educations and our commitment to community, if we recognize that and we don't try to make it better, we don't try to correct that narrative, that story, then Jim Crow still exists. I'll put it very, very bluntly, because we're continuing to erase a people that gave so much. And I'm not going to go through slavery, because I think everybody understands what slavery, we've read what slavery was like. I don't even know what slavery was like. I didn't experience it. But I'm grateful to the dear Lord that I was born in this period. So we have to change things. And we have to do it in a way that as a community we come together and we communicate with each other. And we don't lay blame. We don't start looking as I told someone, history is not about vengeance. History is about truth. And it's about, for me, it's about building community. It's about helping Iberia Parish be better than what it was and what it is. And to me, there is no excuse for our history to read like, and I'm going to say it, like a travel log. Iberia Parish was more than just about the Spaniards coming here. A little bit about the Native Americans and the French. There were a lot of people who contributed. I can tell you about my people by name, those French-speaking Africans. There were a lot of people that came to this community that made in Iberia the kind of community that we have today, where we have like, what, 30,000 people? We've lost a good part of our population. The potential for us to grow even more is there still. But as I told some of my friends, you know, we bring in tourists and they ask, and this is not just Iberia, it's another board that I'm on in Lafayette, where people have challenged them and said, well, hold on, all I'm hearing about are the Acadians. Where were the Africans? And these are white tourists who come in, who are educated, who have money, and who don't appreciate partial truths. So we have to start holding conversations, as Malcolm said today, and sometimes those conversations aren't very comfortable, but truth never is. But we have to start holding these conversations and honoring each other's backgrounds and each other's contributions so we can move forward as far as our community is concerned. So anyway, so I founded the Iberia African American History Society because as I did research, I began to find there were more and more gaps in the history. The art, I'm going to jump a little bit. When you look at the way the symbols around the parish, the way the parish depicts itself, its people, again, the Africans are omitted. There is a painting in the courthouse, and if anyone knows what I'm talking about, please. It was painted by, and I'm going to forget his name, but a gentleman with an Italian last name in 1940, worked with the WPA, hired him to do some art around the state, and he actually was an LSU professor. And has anyone seen that painting in the courthouse? And Fran and I, did you look at it, Fran? Yes. There are like 3 levels to this painting. At the very bottom, there are two men. They look demon-like to me. One had pointed ears, and his eyes, he was very angry, and they were dark. And one had broad nose. No one said they were black, though. The one in the middle had straight hair. His head is down, so you can't really pick out his features very much. But it's obvious that he's not black. The artist was not trying to depict a black man. And the one at the top, with the straight hair, the straight nose, the light complexion, he was supposed to represent man's ascent to higher level values or higher level functioning in society. But the ones at the bottom represent everything that's base about mankind. And so two of the men, one of the men was throwing dice, which is part of that stereotype of that time period, where they represented black men as always gambling and, wasting money. And the other one, I'm trying to remember what the other one was doing. Oh, he was hoarding, he was pushing something to his body. And what he was pushing was money. So he was a hoarder. It was all about greed, right? And I'm thinking, these symbols, my people are absent from most symbols of any value and or representing any kind of moral value, but they're present in this kind of a representation. They're absent from the literature that's written about the city, right? So we need to change things, and it's not something that Phebe Hayes can change. I need a group of people who will work with me to look at the way we represent 40% of the population in this community and help us to do better. And so I founded the Iberia African American Historical Society so that we can do, because again, my research background, we can do research. It's not just about stories, but sometimes those stories lead us to facts that can be verified through primary source documents or records, right? So one of the things that we do, or I've started to do, because the organization is still young, so I don't overburden everyone. I go and I talk to people in the community, not just black, but white also. Poor Dr. Domingue died. Y'all remember Dr. Domingue? Donis? He was my childhood doctor many years ago. Dr. Phebe, So I talk to people, So I talk to people who know about what life was like at certain periods in our community. And sometimes they share a lot of what they know. I talk to a lot of blacks in the community in their 80s and 90s. And one of them who I was interviewing, Mr. Adam Welcome, who was, Adam Dillon?
Yes. Yes.
He just passed, 81, 82 years old. He was like the new Iberian historian. But they know so much about this community, and after talking to them, I'm able to go back to the courthouse, to online sources, to the libraries, etc., and pull documents that verify the kinds of things that they have shared with me. Sometimes these individuals give me pictures. Mr. Sam Cooper, who was a pharmacist in the 1940s, 50s on Hopkins Street. He wasn't a pharmacist, but he owned a pharmacy there. And he was a member of one of these social clubs in Iberia Parish, and he always took these 8mm film of Iberia, Queen Brown Sugar. It didn't matter. The building of Jonas Henderson Senior High, the new school on Anderson Street. He has documented all of those kinds of events. And the family gave me his 8mm films. I think there were about 15 of them. So I'm able to take pictures and images and letters and what have you, because families entrust these things with me. These for me are they're primary source records. So I decided that it was too much for one person, so that's why we founded the Iberia African American Historical Society. And I'm jumping ahead of myself about some of the things that we've been doing. But you understand the need to document the history of people whose history has been ignored. One of the things I found out too was that I looked around Iberia Parish, and I promise you I'm going to come back to the organization in general. And I looked at these historic markers, So, you know, there's one in Montcarmel, or the Frederick Dupurier marker, or is that what it's called? Okay, but what's the one over at the library?
Felicite.
There's Felicite, and then there's also another one of the Dupuriers.
Francisco Boulet.
Okay, yes. Okay, so they have these markers, but with the exception of Felicite, they're all devoted to whites or to structures that have very little, if anything, to do with the Black experience in Iberia Parish, the history of Blacks in Iberia. And I just decided that, again, we don't know in these places that are so important. We are losing memory. We're losing the history of some of these places. At the courthouse, have y'all seen the marker for Howe Institute? At the courthouse. Okay, Howe Institute, if you know where the Iberia Parish Courthouse is, that was the site of the old Howe Institute, which is built according to the marker as being the first school for Black children in Iberia Parish. That's not true. And, you know, but again, I'm so glad they have, it's not a marker, it's a marker that the parish, I'm running out of time.
I was thinking that maybe we could stop for a minute and let Phanat do his presentation and speak up again. No, just don't, we love hearing you talk.
She's a teacher.
I'm not going.
She's a teacher.
I do have to do that too, but I'll keep my presentation very short. If you want to finish that.
I'll go fast. Okay. So that particular marker says Howe Institute was the first Black school for children. It wasn't. Wakefield Institute was the first on Bank Street. I even have it, I think it's like 315 or whatever bank, in 1871 or 72, but a tornado blew it down, the brand new building down in 1874. So again, that history was already lost. Going back to the doctors, we were told, the book suggests that there were no Black doctors in Iberia Parish. I found so far 22. Wow. And 4 of them were women. And one of the women who got her medical degree in 1897, Dr. Emma Wakefield Paye, we were honoring with a marker this fall, November 3rd, as a matter of fact. That marker is going to be placed in Boulet Plaza with the full cooperation, support, enthusiasm of our wonderful mayor, parish president, the council, etc. Yes, ma'am.
The Tourist Commission's happy about that.
Oh yeah, the Tourist Commission. Absolutely, I'm so sorry. Well, that's what I mean. Thank you, Fran, by the partners that we have. And I have even more appreciation for the people that I'm working with in this community. So, so the Iberia African American Historical Society, we are organizing now, and we have right now a board of 18 charter members who are fantastic, and they represent the Shadows, they represent the museum, they represent the university. We have at least three faculty members from UL Lafayette, plus the Ernest Gaines Center archivist. We have people from the community who have Black, white, it doesn't matter, who have been doing research all along on their own that we have invited in so that we can all work on this omission. We can correct this omission together. And the idea is that we're not trying to, because sometimes people feel, well, they're going to point out who my ancestors were, that they were slave owners, that they were involved in the 1944 expulsion of the Black doctors from Iberia Parish. And we're not doing that. History is about truth, but it's, as I told someone, it's not about vengeance. If you learn through our presentations and our talks about what happened in 1944 and you choose to go off on your own to find out who those names were, that's great. But I'm not interested in dividing our community. I'm more interested in our community coming together. We're going to talk honestly, but it won't be about embarrassing people today. And it's probably a very wimpy way to do things. But I feel very passionate about people coming together to honor our history and to make sure that everyone is represented. You know, so I'm going to shut up.
Okay.
You didn't have to rush. Hi everyone, my name is Phanat Xanamane. a lot of what Dr. Phebe Hayes, what she said really resonates with what the work that I've been doing in New Iberia for the past 7 years. I moved back here 7 years ago and made a 10-year commitment to come here to my hometown, my home neighborhood, and commit 10 years of my life to being an artist that would just help out in the community in any way you can figure out you can help out. So 7.5 years into it, the exit date is Christmas 2020. For those of you that are interested in that information.
You can't leave.
But just try and stop me. We'll talk about what happens after I leave, after that date later. But so I was born in 1981 in a Lao refugee camp in Thailand. And this is 10 years after New Iberia desegregated. So, and the year I was born, my family immigrated to the United States and settled in New Iberia. First in the back Manila housing, and then moved into the Mix and Trailer Park, where my mother had the Asia market from 1985 to 2005. And we lived right across the street from this market. And it was on Hopkins Street, and in this, which is the central artery of the historic Black community in New Iberia. So growing up, I saw sort of the aftermath or the ruins of what was left after Jim Crow, desegregation, and what happened to the community. So and that's when many of the Asian immigrants that reside in the area now, when they moved into the area, which was in the early 80s up to the 90s, and growing up there was a really great experience, especially being part of this Asian Lao immigrant community, which was so tight and close-knit. A big reason for that is because, I mean, we still had our language. We were still able to keep Buddhism, which is the primary religion of many of the Lao immigrants here. And we were able to use that culture, Lao Buddhism, to recontextualize and adapt to this new environment in southern Louisiana, which was heavily influenced by French and Creole culture, Cajun culture, and at that time more and more influenced by sort of mainstream suburban American mainstream culture. And my family, my mother had opened up the Asian market business. And it was really not only an economic hub for the community where people could go and they were working minimum wage jobs, and they would take their food stamps and go spend it in this economic hub. And my mother recognized that and wanted to keep the community strong and healthy. And one of the ways that she would help beyond just selling produce and food to the Asian immigrants was to also help with store credit, give loans to families that would need to buy a house or send their child to school or something like that. So the neighborhood and the culture continues to sustain itself very, very strongly, I guess, through the decades, all the way up till now, where we have a huge Lao New Year's festival that just passed, which draws in people from all over the country, Lao people from all over the country. I argue it's probably one of the biggest festivals in Iberia Parish. We have to match the numbers against the gumbo cook-offs sometimes. But in terms of the people that come in from out of state to experience culture, a very unique culture that had come to Louisiana back in the 80s and had sort of evolved and created sort of a new culture that's very tied into the homeland culture. That, for me, sort of shows the power of creative placemaking. And you go out there, I mean, it's all about out to the Lao village at the edge of the parish, and there's a Buddhist temple which is magnificent, and wonderfully ornate and beautiful in the middle of this community, and then you have the village that surrounds it. And it's this community that it's all about creative placemaking that's happened over the past since the 80s. So you know, I think that's probably one of the best examples we have in this area within a short-ish time frame that we can see how culture has really made an economic and social and cultural impact within the region. I think we're supposed to talk about Envision Iberia a little bit, right?
But I'm glad you led into that. So.
Yeah, I think that's just an important part, just leading off from sort of where Dr. Hayes talked about the African American community and how they evolved. And, you know, two totally different stories, but you can kind of see, and I just want to stress how important the roots and the history of the culture are to keeping the community together strong and economically viable. So Envision Iberia is a nonprofit organization that, you know, when I moved back, I didn't have any idea what I was going to do. I was just going to start doing things. And starting a nonprofit wasn't even in the scope of things that I was going to try to do, that I thought I was going to do. But I came back and having followed, I was living in New York City before, and having followed through the internet what was happening in terms of revitalization along Hopkins Street in my old neighborhood, I really went to, you know, my background is in architecture and urban design. I studied architecture at the University of Louisiana for 5 years. Right after that, I went to New York City to continue a graduate education in urban design at Columbia University. And stayed in New York for about 6 years before I felt the pull to come back. And a big part of that was, you know, I was teaching at Columbia, I was teaching at Parsons, I was working with all these great designers, landscape architects, ecologists, but on projects that were about communities. We were figuring out how we can come up with master plans for a community that would help it to transform itself, and how we could put artwork, or how can we put science projects out in the community, out in communities that can help with raising awareness. And you know, and I was in the academic environment, and I just felt that I would serve the architectural and design discipline best if I stepped outside of it, went into a community that actually, that we were talking about all the time, like, oh, we're going to help out West Baltimore, we're going to help out the Harlem and the Bronx with all these projects that are on paper and they're beautiful and everything, but how do these things actually happen in communities? And that was the question that was in my mind, and that's what I set out and left New York City to come back to New Iberia to do as being sort of to continue my passion in architecture, but also try to help out my hometown, which was struggling and had so many challenges. And when I came back, I started with a public art installation, and the concept behind the installation looked at Hopkins Street and all of the master plans that had been, there were like 3 of them that had been developed by the university, previous administrations, other nonprofits, and they were sitting gathering dust on the shelf somewhere. And I was hearing about this on articles in New York City, and I came back and I was like, wow, that's going to be great. They're going to have all the stuff that is in the master plan. It's all going to be implemented. I'm just going to show up and it's going to be awesome. So none of that stuff was happening. So why? How do we empower the actual community to make the transformation happen themselves, right? So put those master plans off the shelf and identify sort of common themes that they each had. And identify things like, you know, they're all suggested things addressing public health and wellness, education, housing, arts and culture, entertainment. So all these things. So it's very just holistic kind of picture of vision that the community had put forth of what they wanted, what they wanted and needed. And so identifying and sort of coming up with 5 different categories, set out to do this 5-week public installation, gathered together a bunch of PVC pipes and erected these sort of pop-up sculptures that created spaces for each theme. So the first week we had a community garden, pop-up community garden. Took all those pieces down, went down a block or 2, put it back up in a different form, and it was the next week it was a a pop-up farmers market, and then so on and so forth, all the way to the end of 5 weeks. And during each of those weeks, we asked people in the community to come and meet in this space where there was a parking lot where it was happening, and just imagine, like, okay, this is our pop-up community garden, and we've gotten together for a week to talk about all these issues. What can we do as a community, as a neighborhood, to actually make these things happen over the long term and become permanent? So each of those weeks and each of those themes sort of had a life of its own, and then my role in this whole process over the past 7 years has been to create the institutions, organizations, get on all these different boards to make sure that relationships were being built and more resources were being pulled together to progress the larger vision for this community. And fast forward from 7 years ago to now, we went from having a pop-up community garden at St. Francis Diner, which is the food bank on the street, to having a real community garden just a couple blocks down, the Iberia Community Garden, with 2 greenhouses, the capacity to grow so much food, and it's been sustaining itself for the past 3 years without any grant funding. That has also opened up, we had the pop-up farmers market that happened 7 years ago. Fast forward to where we are now, we have the Very Fresh Market, which is a permanent farm stand and retail space in the community, right in the center of the West End Cultural District. And it's the way that we're framing that particular project is very similar to, going back to my mother's story and her business and using it as a social, economic, and cultural hub for the community. The manager there, Carl Cooper Jr., who's now the new board president, has really embraced and brought the importance of African history, pre-colonial African history, to this community, and has been a huge advocate to bringing and resurging those roots. And it's going to be a slow process, but we're behind them like 100%, and things are moving forward with that project and all these different levels, and we're continuing to bring in more resources behind that. And so I've got 2.5 more years left, and we're just going to keep on pushing all of these things and looking back at what the community, what we had initially started within the community, or not initially started, but what we had, where we came in and what we saw were the needs and what the community needs were. And we're just going to continue bringing those resources together. And that's what we do as Envision Iberia. Our mission is to spark creative partnerships that advance Iberia Parish. Our main focus right now is more into the West End neighborhood, which is sort of has the most challenges of any neighborhood in the city, I think. And I think, to lift up that neighborhood will make the entire parish, the entire city, the entire parish stronger. So in addition to the market and the community garden, and tying this into sort of creative placemaking and tourism a little bit, I think, I've started also Airbnb and Woofer. Woofer is a worldwide organization, worldwide opportunities are on organic farms. And this is just volunteers that come in and they travel to different organic farms around the world and in exchange for room and board. And it's a great way to bring sort of international people, and they want to come to Hopkins Street, Iberia, and to one of the most impoverished areas in the city, and stay and garden and interact with the culture that we have there, not only the Asian immigrant culture, but the African American community culture, the Cajun and Creole culture. And it's sort of now my role in thinking about how do we build on this little spark of creative tourism that's happening right now. So that's sort of the next steps of what's going on with Envision Iberia. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Phanat. Does anyone have any questions before Phanat leaves? We have a few minutes.
Only up with 5 minutes.
And come on.
Well, I have, I'm living in a tiny little town of Cromwell, Minnesota, that has 120 people, that actually vote there, and all these other people like us actually were living, 3/4 of a mile away, but we don't pay taxes to this little town that we're expecting to do everything. And we have a major trunk highway running through the middle of town. And I'm just trying to imagine how we do things like this. We do have 2 young men, one of whom grew up in the community. They're gay partners, and they're going to open a restaurant, and it's going to be really wonderful. And people did vote for a liquor license for them, because they promised not to compete with the Muni liquor store. So, that after 9 o'clock, they would close after the dinner time. So I'm just really hopeful and inspired. And I guess I don't have a question, but I'm going to find out how to get a hold of you. So we can consult you times, because they want to also do, like a farm market. And there are a lot of people that grow things around, to have that in the store, and to have a bakery and all these. It could be really great. We're trying to find a great building. The one they just decided to buy is a tear down. So I guess they're going to tear it down and build on the site. But at least it's going to be on Main Street and not over the lake.
I have a question, please, Phanat. What would you, if you could have your wish, what would be the next thing to happen in the next year? Stronger support for the market, or
Oh yeah,
another project?
Definitely stronger support. We've been we're now turning in applications to the USDA and the foundations, partnering up with with other larger organizations and neighborhood organizations to support not just the market, but the entire local food economy that's emerging out of the West End. And so my wish would be to get that funding to support that.
And the restaurants, the local restaurants, do they purchase from you and stuff like that?
Here and there. Our problem with local food is always the production. You're always going to run into some sort of hitch, season to season, whether it's bug or disaster or flood or something, and that always gets in the way. So if we can stay on top of our production, we should be good. Yes.
I was just curious what's going to happen after you leave, and what's the infrastructure, planning, and you mentioned that you kind of there's something happening afterwards, but I was just curious how you built the infrastructure and the transition to keep it going.
As I mentioned, Carl Cooper Jr. is our new board president, a young man. He's 28, and he's basically over the next 2.5 years, he's going through a graduate curriculum that Envision the Iberia and myself is teaching him in terms of nonprofit management, community organizing, just getting things done by hook or by crook. Yeah. So he's getting the exposure right now. So there's that transition period where individuals within the board of the organization are taking on sort of stewardship roles of each of the different projects that we're involved in, and will continue to be involved with it after my departure. But when I say departure, I mean like in Christmas 2020, in terms of my hands-on being very involved, that'll have to end because I'm running around like crazy. But I'll still be more I'll be around more as an advisory kind of person.
Can I add something to that too? And I think too that we have to remember, I think, that there's always an evolution of language. I think we've learned a little bit about that the last couple of days. An evolution of culture, and I think there can also be an evolution of an organization. So it may not be exactly the way that Phanat did it, but it doesn't make it bad. It's just different.
Right, it's just different. We had like some projects like the Window Wonderland project and Show Tune Sing Along, which is sort of on hiatus right now. And those are more events that are more focused in the Main Street downtown area. And of course, as the leadership changes, Carl is going to be more interested in the Black community and what happens there and what happens along Hopkins Street. So he's going to be more pulling the organization towards that, which is fine, and that's just kind of how, things are going to evolve.
Yeah.
Thanks, Phanat, so much.
You're very welcome.
Now I'm gonna ask,
I will say that I have to run because I'm going to a Hopkins Street Economic Development District board meeting. And they're reinstating this organization. And it's a quasi-government, state mandated organization with the power to tax and, lay out ordinances and all this other stuff. So there's an opportunity there that why I'm on board with the organization is to try to bring the ideas from creative placemaking into how we talk about economic development in the Hopkins Street district.
Wonderful.
So,
which leads wonderfully into our next presenter, because Monique Boulet's with the Acadiana Planning Commission, and why an Acadiana planning person is here at a creative placemaking summit is really important. So
I'll have to catch it on
what you said.
AOC later.
All right.
There you go.
Take care.
I'll use it. So I'm not sure if George planned out the speakers so well, but Dr. Hayes and Phanat spoke about their culture, and I usually don't open a presentation up like this, but I'm from Lafayette, but spent my Sundays here in New Iberia, because my mother was from New Iberia, and very Cajun, both sides of her family. She was, or is, Kathleen Blanco, and so New Iberia is definitely part of me, and I can bring the Cajun perspective to this as well. But what I do, and why I'm here, is I work with the Acadiana Planning Commission, and I'm gonna sit down. And the Acadiana Planning Commission is led by the parish presidents of Acadia, Evangel, and Iberia, Lafayette, St. Landry, St. Martin, and Vermilion parishes. And so I work with Larry Bouchard, I work with Joel Robideau, and did work with Guy Fournier, now Chester Cedars, and the police jury presidents from throughout the region as well. And we address areas of common need. So from transportation to watershed to economic development. And I guess that's where we come in. We work a lot with George up in Arnaudville, helping to build their efforts there. And so he asked me to talk about cultural economy. And I'm going to talk about a small town in Georgia that we visited last summer. We were up there in the mountains, and it was my entire family looking for something to do one day. And they have Helen, Georgia. And I don't know if you've ever been to Helen, Georgia. It's a little German town. Well, right now I'm trying to plan a trip with my family to France. And my 17-year-old son said, Mom, I don't need to go. I know what Germany is like. Because our tickets are into Frankfurt, because that's the cheapest flight I can get over there. And then we'll take a train. And I said, you know what Germany is like? And he said, well, yeah, I went to Helen, Georgia. And if you know anything about the history, it was a little gold mine town in the 1800s. And I went through a couple of up and downs and got its name in like 1919, I think. And then in the 1950s and 60s, two businessmen got together and said, what can we do to try to bring some economic stability? And they thought about the towns in the Alps. And how can we create an alpine village? They didn't have any German descendants there. They just wanted some kind of economic activity. So they hired an artist who went through the town and drew trim on each of the buildings. They picked a color scheme, and they decorated the town German. And so today, it is a little German town in the middle of America. And they have the Hofbrauhaus, which, if you've been there, it's a very well-known beer house that is really only in Germany, except for now it's in Helen, Georgia. And they have Oktoberfest, and they are attracting millions of people every year. And they did it with an artist and some paint and some trim. And it's funny, because when you realize that and you look at it, it really is just trim. It's cute. I mean, it's cute. But what we have here in all of our cultures is like magic. And I don't think we realize it, and I don't think we own it. We don't, whether it's, if we go back to the complexities of slavery or the complexities of even the Acadian culture, that there's, and I have spoken about this before, and I guess it's kind of a delicate conversation, but I'm part of it, so I feel some ownership in it. There's almost an insecurity about who we are. And when we don't own it, and it's in all of its authenticity, we risk losing it. Because somebody's going to make money off of it. Somebody's going to take it and duplicate it and paint it on a few buildings somewhere and become Cajun town in Iowa or something. I mean, it's kind of a joke, but they did it in Georgia. They just painted trim, you know, and then there are the Cajuns or the whatever it is. And I think there is an economic factor here. We haven't put our heads to this. Well, I guess probably the people in this room are the seeds of that, of putting our heads to this and making it an economic driver. But doing it in a way that preserves who we are, finding those best parts about us and making sure we stay true to that and not getting lost in the economies because anybody can use EAUX and look French or you know what it is, and it's complex. It's not. There's not just one part of our culture that we need to identify. It is the whole culture. It is the whole history of who we are and why we are. And so when you do this and you bring in, and I think I know because I've seen it, George is really realizing this. In Arnaudville is you bring in cultural tourists who stay longer. I was at his place the other day and somebody was there for 3.5 months. I would love a vacation like that. But they stay longer, they spend more. Those dollars flip in the community 3 times more than big retail dollars. You really do see the cultural impact. You really do bring some financial security without compromising the authenticity. And I mean that is what's so special about us. It's our authenticity, and it's taking that and bringing it out, finding those things we are our gifts that we're born with, the things our ancestors did, the trades that we developed. How do we develop that and open it up to the world? And I think we have in a lot of ways. I mean, that's why I grew up watching my mother go around the state, and I think I learned a lot from her. And one of the things I learned is, you know, trying to teach each community to really be true to themselves and to be proud and to grow from that place. And you know, North Louisiana should never try to be South Louisiana. We don't want to be North Louisiana, but we shouldn't. You know, we should be who we are, own it in a way that our ancestors didn't. I think we always have loved our culture and always enjoyed our culture, but getting out of that shell, there's always been a hesitancy, and really owning it. And so I guess that's my message today, is that we have so much more than painted trim. And they've done so much in Helen, Georgia, and it's just a tiny little town. But it is the 3rd most visited place in Georgia next to Savannah and Atlanta. Wow. And they put some trim with a color scheme. And it was very creative artists. And we have a couple of very creative artists leading us in this effort, but I think they've gone a lot deeper, and they really are looking at the culture and really doing some great things. I think I actually have not met Phanat, but I've heard tremendous things about him, and I have worked quite a bit with George, and these are the people that really are making us think different about ourselves, or not different about ourselves, but really just appreciating who we are and learning to live from that and to be that and to own it. And that's my short and sweet message.
So does anyone have any questions for Monique?
Yes, I have a question. Monique, can you tell us how can Acadiana Planning Commission help out with these type of programs?
That's a good question, Jackie. So we have grant writers and we have planners on staff, and we also have a couple of engineers. We do a variety of things, but part of our role is to build relationships with the federal and state funding agencies. And so we work closely with the Department of Commerce, Economic Development Administration, with USDA, with the Delta Regional Authority, and we are the I guess their go-between with a lot of local agencies. So if you have a good project, and that's one of the things I've learned most is if you have a good project, we can find funding somewhere. You know, bring it to us. We can.
Okay, let me have your name.
I'll give it to you. But we do have, you know, I have Rachel on staff, Rachel Goto and Chad Lacombe, and they can help you craft an application. They can also help, pick up the phone and start calling around to see, can we fit it in somewhere? They do really good work. I have to say, I shouldn't take credit because they do a lot. They're kind of the magic behind the scenes. And I have a staff of about, 17 right now. And so we do a lot of, if it's a road, if it's something around a road, one of the projects we're working on in Lafayette is the University Corridor, and it's from Four Corners to the interstate. It's a corridor study. New Iberia, and that's part of the MPO, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. We actually get federal dollars from federal highways. New Iberia is a part of that. If there's a corridor that you all would like to look at differently, we can come in the city or the parish, because both entities are members of the MPO, can come in and look at it. We look at it from a technical perspective. We do all the environmental, they call it a stage 0 in transportation, but all of the traffic assessments. Would a roundabout work there? We look at a lot of roundabouts. We are working on one and maybe more in New Iberia out by the airport. We're actually paying for the study of it and the construction of it. But University from Four Corners to the interstate will become a gateway. And it's just taking the time to back up and look at it rather than from one intersection to the next, but as a corridor. And what is it to the community? And if you go on it, there's walking trails all up and down. I know you guys have areas like that in New Iberia. That's a very strong indicator. You need pedestrian facilities in that area. We have a lot of accidents there, and that's what happens when pedestrians are just making their way through transportation areas, through roadways, is you end up with accidents. And so you really want to accommodate that.
I have another question for you. Could you tell them a little bit, just a sentence or two about my understanding is from the introduction to Mr. George, how do you say his name? Ayada? Yes, about the fact that the federal government actually is seeing creative placemaking, but creative economy, and how it's all over nationwide, and
they are, and that's one thing. I was asked to give a talk on cultural economies at a symposium, and I really didn't have a lot of background in it. We really focused, at the time, a lot of transportation. So the night before I was writing the presentation, I thought, I text George, I was like, can you meet me there tomorrow? And so what I did was a nice fat introduction of George, and then I brought George up. But immediately the Delta Regional Authority picked up on it. Before you knew it, they were hosting a conference in Arnaudville. It's a 5-state conference, pulling people from all over to come and see what's happening there. So the federal government is recognizing it, they're investing in it, and they're trying to start the conversation with it. Really, if we can put together strong, and from a funding perspective, what it is think about what your needs are, think about how you can pull it together as a project, and then we can find funding initiatives. Sometimes you have to fit it a little bit into their objectives. Well, typically you do. But that's where we can come in and, could you do it this way, or could you do it that way? And just to help shape that so that you can fit the funders' objectives and get the funding.
Thank you.
Yes.
I could just add to that, because I know a lot about the MEAs, with the creative placement from Coach Our Town, and to get an Our Town grant, and I think they go up to, $50,000, maybe sometimes more. You have to have a partnership between one public sector and one nonprofit sector organization, and one of them has to be a cultural organization. So it could be the Cultural Affairs Department of the city, and a church even, really, or whatever. And then there's also another really big consortium that the NEA helped to create called Art Place. It operates out of New York, and it often gives larger grants. It gave a significant grant, I think, to the new opening of the old school in New Orleans, which just opened last weekend. Yeah. So, and those also are very interested in, the cultural aspects, the embeddedness in the community. So you can look up, those programs. They've been really, really important. I think they give millions of dollars away from this Art Place organization every year. So those are other places to go.
Yes, and one point she hit on and I think it's consistent with most all funders, is the more collaboration you have, the more of your local organization you have on board. A lot of times, we like to work in silos. This is our idea, this is our organization, we're gonna do this. It kind of kills you when you get to the funding arena, because they really want collaboration. They want to know it's going to work for you and for the tourist center, and they want to know it's going to work for everybody. They want to be the seed in a bigger effort, you know. And when you have collaboration, and that's one of the things we do, is bring those parishes together. Your efforts multiply, you know.
Can I add to that also? Because one of the most interesting cases that we did in our original creative placemaking study, because we insisted on doing case studies, was in Cleveland, where a community development organization teamed up with an initiative by 3 theaters to open an old shuttered movie theater, an old shuttered live theater, and a youth theater, and put them together to form a theater district on the working class west side of Cleveland. And I can tell you that they told me, these were successful, finished studies more or less that we found as examples, that they said each organization had to spend about 1/3 of its time to make that happen. And they had to start first with the streetscape, because nobody would give them money to restore these theaters, so they had to do a marker first. But in those case studies we did are really interesting, and there are many more, and Gabriel Nicodemus will be talking about some of them Thursday. But I think you have to be, one of the things we said, don't have too many partners, because it's very time consuming and it's very hard. And also, you have to really tune in to what your partner organization concerns are. You can't just assume that they're going to jump on and just totally support your ends and aims. And so, but it's very important. In this case, the community development organization brought them development experience that these theater and arts people didn't have. And but these other 2 people had spaces that they were bought and wanted to refurbish. And they decided first to do a streetscape, which was a really brilliant low-cost thing, because none of the big foundations in Cleveland would give the money. They were too busy giving to the big museum and the big, and so on. Anyway, really an interesting case.
Yeah. And I would even say, go beyond your own parish lines or city lines if the project is appropriate. We in Acadiana often kind of compete against each other, and it's not productive. We don't win a whole lot when we do that. When we come together, it's magical, because Lafayette by itself is just Lafayette. You know, I mean, it's our people. You know, at Thanksgiving, that's what I say. At Thanksgiving, we're driving all over this region, from Crowley to Abbeville to Breaux Bridge to Opelousas. You know, if you have a project that stretches into, you know, the theater over there, they're thinking something similar to us and we could do it together, I do think that strengthens the project, the impacts, and also the funding opportunities, because not many people are thinking like that. You know, and all the way back, we're working on watershed as our watershed, which is our region, and then it stretches into, say, Mary Parish and a little bit into Cameron. The federal government has been at our beck and call since the floods of 2016, because we have those parish presidents sitting at one table. So when you can pull parts of the region together where it makes sense, and I think that's your point, it has to make sense. But we have a lot of the same things happening in small ways, but could we pull it together here or there? I think, just think outside of the box where that's concerned, and maybe that's how we got here today.
Exactly how you got here.
I want to live in his box. It's huge.
So, any other questions? Anyone else?
Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Monique. So, you know, so this is a French week, right? And so we've heard about Laotian culture, we've heard about from Acadian planning, we've heard about African culture. I think one of the takeaways from today should be that by learning about other people and other groups, and we learn more about ourselves. If we're going to truly celebrate the French piece, we have to really learn about the other cultures that exist here as well, right? So we're going to take a little tiny break, but before I want to introduce 2 ladies here that we're just going to add quickly to the schedule, and they're going to introduce themselves. But you only have 2 minutes. Okay?
Good afternoon. My name is Diane DeFee. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. I've been here in this area for 10 years, but I've been attached to this area for over 33 years. I married a man from southern Louisiana, and that's how I got down here. But anyway, I represent the ministerial Christian, no, what is it? Federation of Pastors here in the New Iberia area. And it is a group of ministers that have come together spiritually to unite with fathers, pastors, clergymen, priests. They're coming together to mobilize, to bring a unity amongst the body of Christ. And also, they're come together so that God said and gave a mandate that he wanted the city of New Iberia for his own. And so when God spoke that, it's like, well, what does that look like? Well, Lord, what do you mean? You know, what do you mean by you want New Iberia? So when God comes in, he begins to affect economics, political, education, social. He affects and touch every home. God wants to come through New Iberia. He wants it for his own. So again, all of these organizations and these things, what we do as a ministerial federation of pastors is that we have been coming together, and first of all, we started prayer. The Lord said nothing is going to happen without prayer. So we've been coming together monthly, and we've been had all-night prayer. The churches have been coming together. There has been an agenda of the things that have been affecting this region and this area, and we have been mobilizing, praying for these things. We have a monthly prayer walk. We have been walking the communities, praying, and then we also have a thing that we call boots on the ground, where we go door to door telling everyone the mandate that God has said, that he wants this city and what it looks like. And what everybody does is going to be a part of it. If you're going to be in this city, you're going to be affected by this. So again, this is my good girlfriend who's down here. Her name is Dr. Joanna Rochester. She's a missionary. God sent her here to help mobilize. This is what she does in the nations of the world. And so she's been working together with the pastors, mobilizing whatever it is that needs to be done to get them together. It's been a very hard thing because the churches have been so segregated. We talk about segregation. There's segregation right within the churches. If anybody should be united, it should be those that trust in God and believe in God. There's only one God. Why are we so separated? So God is mobilizing and bringing us together so that we can be a part. Any area that you guys, you can't do anything without God sanctioning it. You can't do anything without prayer. So again, the churches are coming together, and we do have a larger vision, which is operating in the community development. Rec centers in each district of the communities that deals with agriculture, horticulture, and the arts. Teaching our children, bringing them together, bringing them back to basics, bringing them back to the basics of thou shalt not steal, lie, kill, murder, these type of things, and then also giving them skills. So again, I'm going to turn over and let Joanne say whatever it is she has to say concerning you.
We'll start.
I just want to thank you for coming together, doing something like this, and we're hearing from all different cultures. What a blessing that is.
Yes.
The one thing that I do want to leave with you is that as we are out on the streets, we're praying over streets, and then we go out into every house. What we have found is that the people are ready to receive the love of the Lord Jesus Christ. The Bible says one thing: the harvest is already white. Laborers are few. And so we have found that we need about 1,000 people running up into different houses. People are crying on the streets. They're dancing on the streets when they see us. They think, we thought you forgot all about us. People want to be loved today. And anything we can do to bring love to a house, we will find that they never resist it. They just want to be loved. They just want to be loved. So I want to leave you with that, because everything that we're doing here is so important, it's so needed, knowing about cultures and including them. But people need to be touched. They need the love of God. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. So we'll take a little brief break. Somebody can go to the bathroom and we'll pick up in a few minutes. But I want everyone to remember too, like spirituality is also a cultural piece. You know, art, language, music, and spirituality, that can all be a cultural piece. And that can also be developed in community.